They're reviving Lowman Henry in the back. We're ahead of time. I think it's the first time it's ever happened in how many years? Lowman's still out, so we'll talk to him a little bit later. You know, I heard something this morning that was really interesting in our news before I went on my show, and it was this, that how many times have you heard this where it says, today Congress voted mostly along partisan lines, or the State Assembly, they voted mostly along partisan lines. Wouldn't it be nice to hear him say sometime, today the State Assembly voted mostly along common sense lines to help the citizen? Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to hear sometime? I don't know about you, I'd clap over that one, but anyway. Apparently that wasn't that good because it's got a smattering of clapping right there. It wasn't a unified kind of thing at all. I could just now barely talk about it. But anyway, next up is Gordon Tom. And one of the best things you can do when you have an MC is to give him your bio just seconds before you go on, so you don't have a chance to really go through this and do anything stupid with it. But we may still find a way to do this anyway. Gordon is a senior advisor for the CO2 Coalition. It means he never breathes in, he always breathes out. But anyway, this is a national organization that's bringing honesty to climate science. That's new and different. Primary editor of the best-selling book, Inconvenient Facts, The Science Al Gore Doesn't Want You to Know, which I've read, by the way, and it's very good. And is a senior fellow with the Commonwealth Foundation, another great organization here in the state of Pennsylvania. Gordon has been a communications executive in the nuclear power and electric utility industries, a member of an international management consulting company, a speaker for the International Atomic Energy Agency, and a newspaper reporter. Why does that sound kind of weird at the end? It has all these glossy things and then a newspaper reporter. But he's a pretty smart guy. And he is going to have our next panel this morning, which is all going to be dealing with powering responsible energy policy. You'll want to tune into this one. Gordon Tom, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. I didn't tell Gary that I started off when I was about 8 or 9 years old helping my grandfather slaughter hogs. So I don't know what he would have done with that one. Well, it's good to be here and good afternoon. I'm going to introduce our panelists here in a moment. Just wanted to make a few brief comments. And I'll start off by noting that yesterday, the Wall Street Journal wrote, "The U.S. is barreling toward one of the greatest self-inflicted wounds in its history." This came into sharper focus last week, the journal continues, sharper focus last week when President Biden suspended oil leases in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, even as Russia and OPEC announced production increases. This suspension of oil leases is in addition to the cancellation of a major pipeline and promises of all kinds of other regulatory mischief. The very industries that fueled the Industrial Revolution and brought us the prosperity that we are enjoying today are under attack like never before. Our traditional energy suppliers are a target of environmental extremists and cynical opportunists who seek to exploit the so-called climate crisis for money and power. And Pennsylvania is at the very bullseye of that target. Pennsylvania is the nation's second largest producer of natural gas, making it one of the largest producers in the world. It is the third largest producer of coal in the country and the second largest coal exporter to foreign markets. The state ranks second in the nation after Illinois in the generation of electricity with nuclear power. And the state is the leading exporter of electricity to other states. This kind of productivity should be celebrated and nurtured. However, our governor, much like the Biden administration, seeks to undermine it at every turn. What our energy suppliers get from the Wolf administration is more regulation, permitting delays, and attempts to tax some segments of the industry out of existence. Before going to our panel, who I want to be the main speakers here today, I will say two things about the organization I'm with. That is the CO2 Coalition. Most of you probably never heard of it. But the two things I want to say is, one, I love CO2 and so should you. And the other is to report that the CO2 Coalition will be appearing before the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee later this month to expose for what it is the pseudoscience of Governor Wolf's anti-fossil fuel agenda. The coalition has more than 70 world-class scientists who are equipped to do just that. So that should be fun. Now for our panel. The people on this panel and their colleagues and allies are working every day to keep Pennsylvania's governor from wounding, if not killing, our energy producers and impoverishing our energy consumers. That'd be you and I, you and me. Our panelists are State Senator Joe Pittman, who represents all of Armstrong and Indiana counties and parts of Butler and Westmoreland counties. Among quite a number of other things, he is vice chairman of the Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee and a leading opponent of Governor Wolf's proposal to enter into a multi-state regional greenhouse gas initiative. Short name is RGGI, RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's also known as a carbon tax. So the other stuff's a euphemism. We also have Rachael Gleason, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, the legislative and regulatory advocacy arm of the third largest coal-producing state in the country, Pennsylvania. And Carl Marrara, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. So I'm going to ask to start us off if Senator Pittman would start us off down the path of what you think about our energy situation.
Thank you, Gordon, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, it's very nice to share the stage with a fellow Indiana Countian. Gordon and I were talking. He's from southern Indiana County. I'm from northern Indiana County, and apparently we think well alike whenever we were from Indiana County. But I do appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about a rather complicated subject that really, when you boil it down, is very simple. Gordon mentioned RGGI. What is RGGI? Well, RGGI is a multi-state consortium made up of northeastern states that have come together to establish a cap-and-trade program for the paying of emissions for carbon from power plants, carbon-emitting power plants. Our governor, through executive order, is attempting to unilaterally and, in my opinion, illegally enter us into the RGGI consortium. Now, the consequences of that are very profound. If the governor gets his way, every carbon-emitting power plant in this Commonwealth will have to pay for the privilege of emitting carbon to produce electricity. By the governor's own admission, this is a $550 million revenue generator. So what it is it's a $550 million tax on the use of electricity. And if you can think of a more regressive tax to impose on people than to tax their consumption of power, let me know. It is by far and away the most regressive effort to raise revenue off the backs of poor people, in my opinion. So that's what it does. What it doesn't do is it doesn't save the planet, all right? The concept is that by entering us into RGGI, it will cause us to reduce our carbon emissions. Now, if you follow the facts, and if you follow the science as DEP's own modeling, while they've tried to implement this regulation has shown, is that most of the carbon that we will no longer emit here in the Commonwealth will be generated in states to the west of us. We are part of a 13-state power grid known as the PJM. So the power we're using today doesn't necessarily come from Pennsylvania. It can come from anywhere in that state grid. And so if you have states like Ohio and West Virginia that are not in the RGGI scheme, their carbon-emitting power plants do not have to pay the price. So if you look right now in the state of Ohio, there is a natural gas plant being built right across our border. It's an 1,800 megawatt natural gas plant, and it will not be subjected to this tax. But every natural gas plant in this Commonwealth and the 3 coal-fired power plants that I represent will be subjected. So what are we doing? We are pushing the resource that we have here. We export electricity, not just across the PJM grid, but really across the nation. We export electricity. We're essentially ceding that to the states to the west of us. And we're doing it for no benefit because, as I said, DEP's own modeling shows that 86% of the supposed reduction in carbon emissions will be made up in the states west of us. And the real irony of this, if you think about it, and here I am sitting with 3 massive coal-fired power plants that Gordon knows very well. He grew up in the backyard of them. They generate thousands of jobs, family-sustaining jobs. They produce power. They have modernized. They have built scrubbers. They have built emissions controls. They have done everything that they need to do to comply. And at this point, the governor is attempting to tax them out of existence. But he wants this $550 million, and he comes to me and he says, you know what, Senator, we'll fix your communities. We'll solve your problems because we're going to get all this money. But when you think about it, where's the money come from? The money comes from the continued emitting of carbon. If power plants don't emit carbon, they don't pay the tax. So what are we achieving? We're either achieving higher electric bills and still emitting carbon, or we're pushing our resources to other states for zero benefit. That's it in a nutshell. It's a unilateral effort. It's, again, an illegal effort from my point of view, but we have built, I heard a comment when we were being introduced about a common sense vote, not by a partisan vote, but a common sense vote. Well, we do have bipartisan support for an effort to pass legislation that simply says, Governor, if you want to impose a tax, which you legally can't impose, you need to have the General Assembly approve it. We passed that bill last session. We're going to pass that bill again this session, and I will tell you we have gained significant amount of support from both sides of the aisle. And we'll talk about this a little more, about the political dynamic and the policy dynamic and what I believe is a real shift in the entire paradigm of a new conservative governing coalition.
Thank you. Rachel, could you speak to us a little bit about your experience as representing producers of energy?
Sure. Well, as the senator said, he's from Indiana County as well as you, and we do mine a lot of coal in Indiana County. It doesn't go to those power plants. It goes towards infrastructure and making steel because it's primarily metallurgical coal. But in the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania, we have the largest underground mining complex in North America. It's bigger than Manhattan. And we send probably, depending on the year, 7-8 million tons of coal by rail to the power plants in Indiana and Armstrong County. So there's a direct correlation between the coal that's mined in Pennsylvania and those power plants in Pennsylvania. Now, coal is a global market. I mean, right now, China's fighting with Australia, and they're mad at each other, which has increased our exports. So we do export a significant amount of coal overseas as well. But we do have these challenges like Reggie, where we won't have that market anymore and we will have to go somewhere else. Well, the challenges with that is coal has to be transported somehow. So it's either transported by rail or it's transported by barge. And to the west of us, as Senator Pittman said, in Ohio and West Virginia, there are a lot of conveniently located mines that are next to power plants that are river served. So getting our coal west will be a little bit more difficult competitively with those energy markets. Outside of that, nationally, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationally, we're facing significant headwinds in this idea that we just need to get rid of all fossil fuels, which is just infallible and not possible. Fossil fuels create everything. You can install as much solar or as much wind as you possibly want, but it does not matter how many megawatts or gigawatts it is if it cannot operate 24 hours a day. And it always needs to be backed up by something that's reliable and something that's resilient, and that's coal, natural gas, and nuclear. So we don't, natural gas prices significantly impact the coal markets, and we don't fault our fossil fuel cousin in those markets, or we want to just compete competitively in a market without having subsidies to renewables and taxes like what the RGGI tax would do to our coal-fired generation and some older natural gas-fired generation in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Thank you. And Carl, you represent users, big users of electricity. Tell us how things look from your perspective.
I think it's very simply put in this way, that Governor Wolf and Governor Wolf's administration, their attitudes and their policies toward energy are the antithesis of economic competitiveness. And for manufacturers, you're exactly right. Anytime you make any kind of good, you're going to use energy and you're going to use a lot of it. We have some members that, and this is not an exaggeration, their energy bills are $1 million a month. And when you're talking about a policy like RGGI, there's been many different studies. We're not quite sure exactly where it's going to fall, but we think it's at least 9%. It could be 15% of an increase in cost for our end users. And that's why we in the manufacturing community are so passionate about energy advocacy, because it's often the #1 input in creating that finished good. But you mentioned natural gas, Rachel, and that's something we need to talk about too, and energy deployment through Pennsylvania. Gordon, you said in the introduction that Pennsylvania is the second largest producer of natural gas in the United States. But the most important point in that is that our increased production of natural gas has made the United States the #1 producer of natural gas in the world. And who did we beat out? Russia. So when it comes down to it, Pennsylvania's energy leadership is American energy leadership. And that protects us on the global stage. Geopolitically, that's our position worldwide. And Pennsylvania is an integral part of that. So that's why we're passionate about things like pipeline deployment. But we have to fight the Wolf administration and all the offices on that as well. Natural gas isn't just used for an energy source for manufacturers, but natural gas becomes liquids, and those liquids become feedstocks for all modern manufacturing. All the things that you're probably touching right now, the pen, the water bottle, even the synthetic fibers in the tablecloth that's at your table right now are all made typically from oil or natural gas derivatives. And those things should be made in Pennsylvania. Why? Because we have the supply. It's right here. It's in our Commonwealth. We can make the feedstocks that our modern manufacturers use to create those goods right here. And if we've learned anything over the last 18 months, it's that we cannot rely on adversarial foreign powers to supply the goods that we need. We should be making them here. So energy advocacy is very central to what we do. It's why we're so passionate about these things. Policies that the Wolf administration has on RGGI are of the utmost importance that we oppose, but at every turn, the Wolf administration is proposing another new additional tax on energy through a severance tax, even though we already have the impact fee or impact tax. Whether it's pipeline deployment, whether it's the regulatory agencies, we need an administrative office that works with Pennsylvania energy production in order for Pennsylvania to lead on the world stage. Thank you.
Yeah. Yesterday, one of the things, when you're by yourself thinking about these things, sometimes you can get a little depressed. Yesterday, I had my first conversation with these three people, and just knowing these three people are working together boosted my spirits. Honest to God, it did. Joe mentioned my roots in Indiana County. Well, my father worked for 42 years in a coal-fired power plant at Sword, Pennsylvania. I drove coal truck when I was in college. So coal and energy in general has put a lot of bread on my table, and so I get a little worked up about it. Joe, would you speak a little bit? You mentioned yesterday, and again, you referenced it today, the kind of alliances developed to support our energy efforts in Pennsylvania?
Well, much of what Carl said, I have found to be said by the private sector trade unions as well. There has been a paradigm shift, and truthfully, I think it began in 2016 with the election of President Trump. It began with a lot of the discussions of federal policy as it relates to trade, certainly some of the social issues, the Keystone Pipeline being one of the biggest. But what we have found is that the private sector trade unions very much want energy to be produced and produced responsibly. And they have been tremendous allies in this cause. And when you look at how radicalized, whether it's through the Green New Deal or through RGGI or President Biden's day one cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline, we're finding more and more that we have a lot in common. And I do believe that it is increasingly becoming part of a winning coalition here in Pennsylvania. We have worked with Carl. We have worked with the private sector trade unions on these issues, and the commonalities are real. They don't like red tape. They don't like overregulation. They don't like a poor business environment. Why? Because they want to work. They want to feed their families. And they understand that what we have been given here in the Commonwealth as a God-given natural resource is here for our responsible use and for our ability to maintain, sustain, and grow families. And that's exactly what they have found that has come from our coal and natural gas resources. So I believe that it is a budding coalition that, candidly, we need to embrace because there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And we have found that to be the case over the last 4 years. Perhaps Carl and Rachael have a point of view in that as well.
Yeah, I can add to that. So after the governor signed the executive order pretty much directing our DEP, our Department of Environmental Protection, to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, Carl and I worked with some other groups to form a coalition, which is called the Power PA Jobs Alliance, and work to involve the people that work at the plants, the manufacturers that will be impacted by higher electricity prices, folks like the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, that our jobs and our production will be directly impacted. And we have, I don't know, 20, 30 different folks in this alliance.
Oh, yeah, at least. Yeah.
And it's very diverse and very interesting because a lot of the unions, you know, they want to keep their jobs. And these power plants, they employ the Boilermakers, they employ IBEW, AFL-CIO, the state trades, they're all members of our alliance. And they recognize that this unilateral action and this unilateral attempt to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative will shut down power plants and impact thousands of direct jobs, tens of thousands of indirect jobs. And these are jobs that are family-sustaining wages. I know the average underground coal miner in Pennsylvania makes $103,000. That's a significant wage. And when you know, I mentioned earlier, we send 7 to 8 million tons to these power plants. One longwall is about 5.5 million tons. So that's 500 employees. So you're directly impacting 500 employees if you take away that 5.5 million tons. Just like the power plants, these are family-sustaining wages, these are blue-collar union workers, and they recognize that they are not going to be able to be retrained or cross-trained, or there aren't solar jobs. I mean, they don't really exist. All the solar panels are manufactured in China with the rare earth elements that China mines that we don't have here in Pennsylvania. The wind turbine magnets are manufactured in China. So the jobs just don't exist. So we started this coalition and have been working for the past, I don't know, year and a half to try and educate folks on the governor's unilateral action through the Power PA Jobs Alliance. I encourage you to go to our website. We're on Facebook and Twitter. It's powerpajobs.com, and just learn a little bit more about this effort to join RGGI.
Yeah, so you think about it, right? And the governor wants to join RGGI to do what? Raise funds to install more solar panels that are made where? China. 80% of solar panels are made in China, but China owns about 100% of all the elements that goes into those solar panels. So rather than employing Pennsylvanians to produce energy for Pennsylvania energy consumers to use, we're going to tax Pennsylvania citizens to buy solar panels from China. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And that's why, you know what, in the past, there has been a political division between business and labor. But I think that, to Senator Pittman's point, that tide is shifting extremely rapidly. I would say that tide has already, that tide has already broken. And it's been truly amazing, because you know what, at the end of the day, there might be some disputes between labor and between management on some minor things, but at least we want the jobs to exist in the first place, right? And these are hardworking Pennsylvanians that want to support their families and support their communities, and that's what's at stake. And it's truly been a team effort, but I do encourage, like Rachel said, everybody to go to www.powerpajobs.com, learn about the issue. There's a take action button that will connect you to your lawmakers and advocate that Pennsylvania should not enter into RGGI, and at the very least, should at least have the General Assembly as a part of that process.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I really do encourage people to go to that website,
powerpajobs.com.
powerpajobs.com. I actually checked that website out a week or so ago, and I came up with these statistics that website published. This is a couple of polls that were done by the Lincoln Institute and Susquehanna Polling and Research. On the question of whether the governors taking unilateral action on energy policies directly affecting electric rates, 73% of business owners oppose that, and 60% of likely voters oppose that. On the question of charging a fee for on carbon dioxide emissions, so charging energy producers for their emissions of carbon dioxide, 67% of business owners oppose that, 57% of independent voters oppose that. So there is some common sense in the land, I think. I think we can take heart in that. And let me just turn back to the panel. Do you have any final remarks?
One quick thing that, and I think that this is where voters, and especially when we see this political realignment, why we see this political realignment. Energy is just a business input. It's ultimately a part of business competitiveness, just like taxes are, just like the regulatory environment is. So ultimately, right now, in American society, really in global society, business capital is more liquid than it has ever been. And people are more able to work from wherever than they've ever been. So business capital is going to flow like water, right? It's going to flow to the path of least resistance. If we keep putting up barriers, if we keep creating new taxes, new fees, new regulatory structures, the business capital is going to flow to a path of least resistance, and that's not Pennsylvania. And that's what we need to change, and I thank Rachael and thank Senator Pittman for helping to work on that, because what we want is a strong, prosperous Pennsylvania, and one that is also very environmentally sound, right? Nobody here is saying that we want to exploit the environment. But if anything, if you think about it, it makes the most sense for this economic activity, this industrial activity, to occur here, because we don't violate human rights. We don't plunder the environment. We do it in a safe, responsible manner. The safest and most responsible manner, I would argue, probably in the entire world. So why wouldn't we want that to happen here? Would you rather it happen in the Congo or in China or Saudi Arabia? It should be happening here. And ultimately, that's what we're fighting for.
If I could add to that. As the senator mentioned, we participate in a regional transmission organization called PJM, and this is why RGGI does not make sense for Pennsylvania. And to Carl's point, how we are going to be exporting jobs and exporting our economy to states like Ohio and West Virginia. West Virginia is 90% coal generation right now, and they export 50% of that to other states. Ohio is about 50-50 coal and gas, but with the 1,800 megawatt giant that's being built on the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, that's probably going to increase a bit. But those same states compete against us. So when we're taxed and they're not, that's where the jobs and that's where the power generation is going to go. So these New England states that are a compact of states in RGGI that say, oh, we cut our CO2, which is exactly what will happen in Pennsylvania when these power plants close. DEP's own modeling shows that there's a 0.89% reduction, less than 1%, 0.89% reduction in CO2 in the PJM RTO by 2030. That's it. That's all we're doing to export all of our jobs and all of our power generation to West Virginia and Ohio. And that's where manufacturing will occur. That's where folks will have lower electricity prices. And that's why Pennsylvania's economy will ultimately be hurt by these unilateral offerings.
Wow. What was that number?
0.89.
0.89. If we would all just take a deep breath and hold it for a while, maybe that would do it.
I mean, even better in the Eastern Interconnection, it's 0.16% reduction. So it just shows you it doesn't actually reduce CO2, it just moves it around.
Exactly, exactly. Joe, anything else for us?
Well, I would just emphasize the reason why the working families that I represent are so insulted by what President Biden and Governor Wolf have done to threaten their livelihoods is because if you look at the facts, they've been part of the solution. They're not part of the problem. We have reduced our CO2 emissions. And why have we done that? We've done that because we've brought natural gas to market. We're mining coal more efficiently now than ever. We've put the emission controls that we need to reduce our emissions on our coal-fired power plants. And you know what is ironic about that power plant your father worked in? It is now the largest waste coal power plant in the world. In the world. And what does it do? It chews up what we call bony piles. It mitigates acid mine drainage. It's cleaning up the scars of the past, but we've done it through market-based technologies. We've done it through efficiency. We've done it through innovation, and that is what has helped change our dynamic. If you want to reduce carbon emissions, we're not the problem. China's the problem. India's the problem. I mean, if that's the governor's objective, maybe that's where he needs to move. But this isn't the problem. He should be holding us up. He should be holding us up as a model to the rest of the world as the solution and how to do it and how to do it right, not as the problem. And that's what we're fighting for. That's what we're fighting about. And that's why I fundamentally believe, as Carl said, we are on the cusp of an absolute paradigm shift in our political direction, in our governing. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the governor wants to do this unilaterally. Well, in 18 months, I assure you he is no longer in office. And the next governor of this Commonwealth either was, is, or will be at this conference, and she or he will be able to walk in and unilaterally reverse what he has done. The problem is we can't let the damage already be inflicted, and that's what worries me about the next 18 months.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you. All right, very good.